Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is what I call my morning musings. We are involved in a study of the eschatology of the parables of Jesus. We're looking at Jesus' second parable, the parable of the tares and the wheat, the harvest at the end of the age. Jesus said that the coming of the Son of Man, the sending forth of the angels, the gathering together of the elect, the destruction of the wicked, would be at the end of, quote, this age, his age. Now, I want you to notice something very, very powerful. Jesus then tells two more parables. I'm going to skip over the parable of the pearl of great price and go right straight to verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which, when it was full, they drew to the shore, they sat down, gathered the good into vessels, threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Well, obviously, we have the same motifs at work that we do in the parable of the wheat and the tares. All right? We have the gathering, we have the separation, we have the judgment or the reward. Now watch this. This is critical. Jesus said to them, now he's talking to his inner circle of disciples, to whom he had said, I'm teaching you the parables so that you will understand the mysteries of the kingdom. Okay? Jesus said to them, have you understood all these things? They said, yes. Oh, wow. This is incredible. Now, for brevity, let me express it like this. Jesus just told the parable of the wheat and the tares, the harvest at the coming of the Son of Man at the end of the age. He said that would be fulfilled when Daniel chapter 12 was fulfilled. Daniel chapter 12 foretold the resurrection at the time of the end when the righteous would shine forth in the kingdom, and Daniel chapter 12 verse 7 said it would be when, quote, the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, unquote. Let me ask you to ask yourself this question. What was the power of Old Covenant Israel? One thing alone, her covenant relationship with the God of Israel. Wasn't her military, it was her covenant relationship. But now, keep this in mind. Daniel foretold the resurrection at the time of the end of the age, when the righteous would shine, which would also be the time when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. The end of the age harvest at the coming of the Son of Man to gather together the elect, destroy the wicked, again, at the end of the age. That would be in fulfillment of Daniel 12. And Jesus asked his disciples, do you understand? They said, yes. Oh, now watch this. Matthew chapter 24. Jesus is walking out of the temple. The disciples are showing him the beauty and the size of the stones. And Jesus says, do you not see all of these things, that the time is coming in which not one stone will be left standing on top of another? In direct response to that prediction, the disciples asked, tell us, when shall these things be? What things? Destruction of the temple. What did the temple represent? The old covenant, the law of Moses, the age of Moses and the law. It represented Israel's power. Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. Now watch. They use the same identical distinctive Greek term, suntelia ton aorion, that Jesus used in Matthew 13 in the parable of the wheat and the tares, and in the parable of the fish net. That term's only used about 7 times in the New Testament. Here's what's so incredible. 99% of commentators come to Matthew chapter 24 and they say, well, you know, the disciples were confused. They mistakenly linked the destruction of the temple with the end of the age. Really? Wait a minute now. Well, you know, John Calvin said the disciples could not imagine the destruction of that temple unless it was the end of time and the destruction of the earth. Really? Did those disciples not know the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC? And yet it wasn't the end of the age, and it wasn't the end of time, it wasn't the end of the earth. Okay. So here are the disciples that have heard Jesus teach the parable of the wheat and the tares, saying that harvest would be at the end of the age they were living in right then, the Mosaic age. That would be in fulfillment of Daniel. Daniel said the harvest at the end of the age would be when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. The power of the holy people was the old covenant, their covenant relationship with God. Jesus tells this parable in Matthew 13, tells another parable about the same identical thing, asked his disciples, do you understand? And they say, yes, we understand. Well, what did they understand? Did they not understand that the end of the age would be when the power of the holy people is completely destroyed? They said they understood. So in Matthew 24, we have Jesus predicting the destruction of the temple, the very symbol. Kenneth Gentry says the temple was the very epitome of the expression of the old covenant of Israel. Okay, so Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple, the very epitome and the very symbol of the old covenant relationship between Israel and God. The disciples immediately, in response to that, say, well, tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And everyone wants to say the disciples were confused. They didn't really know what they were talking about. They mistakenly linked the end of the age with the fall of Jerusalem. Wait a minute. It was Daniel who said that Israel's power, symbolized by the temple, would be destroyed. And that would be the time of the end of the age. That would be the time of the resurrection harvest of Matthew 13. Now look, it seems to me that everyone who is saying the disciples were confused or simply in error in Matthew 24 are not looking at Matthew 13 closely enough. In 2 parables, Jesus speaks of the end of the age, which is directly from Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. Daniel 12 is emphatic and explicit and undeniable in placing the end of the age at the time of the destruction of the power of the holy people, and Jesus tells 2 parables drawn directly from that concept. One of them even quoting Daniel chapter 12, he asked the disciples, do you understand? They say, yes, we understand. And then in Matthew 24, he's talking about the destruction of the temple, the symbol of that old covenant power of the holy people, and we're supposed to believe the disciples, well, they really are confused after all. They really do not understand after all, even though they told Jesus, yes, we understand. We understand your application of Daniel 12 and the destruction of the holy people to the end of the age. And now they're asking the specifics about it. Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming? Is that the coming of Matthew 13? If it's not, why isn't it? and the end of the age. Is it the end of the age of Matthew 13? If it's the end of the age of Matthew 13, then that end of the age was supposed to be when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered. The disciples, ladies and gentlemen, those disciples were not as confused as we want to claim, as the majority of commentators claim. Were they mistaken on lots of other occasions? Yes, they were. How do we know that? Because the Bible tells us so. Nowhere in Matthew 24 does it say, imply, or infer that the disciples truly were mistaken, truly were confused, or just didn't know what they were asking about. They said they understood Jesus' parables about the end of the age that Daniel posited at the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the Old Covenant. Why don't we accept that and accept the fact that Daniel places the end of the age harvest, the end of the age resurrection, when the power of the holy people was completely shattered? That was AD 70. Hey, look, I've got a whole bunch more in my series on the parables of Jesus, 32 lessons, okay? And also the 2006 Preterist Pilgrim Weekend on the Eschatology, the parables of Jesus. We've just got a wealth of information in there. Go to my websites, eschatology.org or bibleprophecy.com. Order one or both. Mention that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Wow, thanks so much for joining me. Do you see the power of the eschatology of the parables of Jesus? It's fantastic. We'll see you on the flip side.